Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. This is Jason Morse, director of the Go School of Real Estate here in North Carolina. And back with me today is instructor, Mr. Rob Grantmeyer. Hello, Mr. Rob. Welcome
Hey,
back.
Jason. Thanks for having me today, buddy. I appreciate it.
Always enjoy having you as well as our audience. They always say, Rob is the coolest. I'm a little jealous. You are the coolest, my sir, my friend. So thanks for joining us today again on one of our new or our latest edition, I guess you could call it, our latest volume, our latest episode of Five Things, our Five Things series that we have compiled based on some topics that we see students often messing up, so to speak, or getting answers wrong on these topics. These, again, are topics that we take from course exams to look at and see, again, what our patterns are where students maybe are struggling the most. And so we take those topics and we outline the top 5 things that we want you to know about them. And here we are with these videos now. So today's 5 Things episode is going to be about the working with real estate agents disclosure. We refer to that, as the WWREA. So keep in mind, you may see that acronym quite often, the WWREA disclosure. And for our current students who may be watching, we're specifically referring to section 7 or Roman numeral VII of your course syllabus called Brokerage Relationships, Law and Practice, and the accompanying unit 7 of your textbook, Real Estate Brokerage and Law of Agency. So, Rob, let's get going with our top 5 things we want our folks to know about WWREA. And we'll start with the first one, the purpose. You know, everything's got to have a purpose, right? And sometimes it helps a lot to understand the purpose of what we're learning. And there's a big purpose, a couple of primary purposes for the WWREA. Wouldn't you say, Rob? What are those purposes? What do you think?
Well, I always like to remind people that you have essentially 2 different entities that write the majority of the documents that are available to real estate agents in North Carolina. You've got the North Carolina Association of Realtors, who writes the drafts, the contracts, drafts the agreements. Essentially, their job is to support us and help us make a living, is the way I look at it. Then you've got the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Their job is to protect the consumer. So their job, I mean, they're real friendly. We like them and they do support us, but it's not their job to help us get from to help us essentially earn a paycheck. It's their job to ultimately to protect the consumers from maybe potentially misbehavior from real estate agents. And there's been a little bit of that throughout history where agents weren't very forthcoming with certain information they should have been. And also perhaps an agent may have used certain information about a party, about a situation. That information may have been used against them without their consent and without their knowledge. So this document exists for the purpose of warning potential buyers, potential sellers that, hey, maybe you don't want to share certain confidential information with me until we've got the teams all formed up, so to speak. I borrowed that one from Deborah Carpenter. She said that in another video. Till we've got the teams all formed up, pal, you might want to keep that to yourself, that you are a doctor and work at Duke and make $380,000 a year and what your price range is. That might be better kept to yourself until we're sure that we're both playing for the Red Sox, essentially.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I always think about the Miranda rights when we're talking about the WWREA. Am I the only one there? Not that I've ever been read.
You've never heard them in person, but
I've never heard them in person.
What's funny is I've had a couple retired detectives in class, and every time we bring this up, they say, "Man, you'd be amazed what people will tell you." They're like, you read them their Miranda rights, and then the criminals proceed to give up everything. You warn them, right? It's better, they're not really warning you it's better, but they're saying you have the right to remain silent, seek legal counsel, blah, blah, blah. And then they said almost to a 100% of the time, the bad guys, if you will proceed to tell them where the money is and who was driving the car and, who else was involved. And I heard a real estate teacher one time say, and I love this, he said, people may have the right to remain silent, but rarely do they have the ability to remain silent. And that goes for all of us, especially real estate teachers.
Yeah,
so
silence is hard for us as an adult. We have this natural instinct or natural reflex to just, especially those of us who are very extroverted and want to talk with you and share all of our business with you. But just like you said, with the detectives and the police personnel, they are warning you that and letting you know what your rights are. Same with real estate, working with real estate, and so again, I look at it as it's definitely consumer protection, as you were talking about. And it's our role as a licensed real estate agent to make sure that those who are in front of us or those that are on the phone with us understand their rights, so to speak, in North Carolina as a consumer of real estate, and understanding the role that agency plays in North Carolina, because not all states are practice this type of thing, right? Some are what's called a transactional state in real estate. Don't want to confuse our audience necessarily too much with that, but just understand that again, we are informing. It's our duty to inform our folks, especially upon meeting them, that, hey, until you hire me, basically, until I am working solely for you as an agent, hold off on telling me anything that perhaps could be used against you, such as me having to tell the seller all of your business, which is what I would have to do, right, if I became aware of that information. So yeah, your right to remain silent is often, again, what I think of, or someone reading me my Miranda rights. That's essentially what's happening here when we are disclosing the working with real estate agents disclosure. We are disclosing what those rights are in North Carolina for the consumer of real estate. All right. Let's move on now to number 2. Now that we understand, again, what's the purpose of this disclosure? Again, consumer protection and making sure they understand specifically the role the agency plays. Now, Rob, let's shift gears into when we should disclose this. And this is going to definitely be tested, not only in the course, but most likely 101% likely on the licensing exam. What you say as far as when to disclose this, and this term that we know so well, Rob, first substantial contact.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
What is first substantial contact? We've got some examples here on the screen, but how would you describe to our students in terms of the requirement to disclose this no later than first substantial contact?
So there's kind of 2 bullet points I like to use to describe it. One, which is the actual written rule itself, the actual written rule that the Real Estate Commission came up with. And it said at the time, either broker or consumer begins to act as though a brokerage relationship exists, or that brokerage services are being provided. So if this person is a potential buyer, potential seller, is insinuating that I'm their agent, that I'm their representative, that you're my guy, right? You're going to bat for me. You're trying to get a base hit for me. Well, I need to say, well, hang on just a sec. Let's talk about how agency works in North Carolina, because that might be impossible. If I'm working for a seller who is not allowing dual agency and is insisting on single agency, and I'm at an open house and somebody starts talking to me as though I'm going to be their agent, because a lot of people in the public don't realize all these laws of agency. They think we're almost like social workers who are just here to help everybody get what they want. But North Carolina doesn't work that way. We are, I don't like to say us versus them, but you are on one side or the other. Typically, occasionally you're on both sides, but you're always on somebody's team. There's no neutrality, or I should say rarely is there neutrality for a real estate agent. It certainly doesn't start that way. You typically start where you're advocating for one side. So if someone begins to act as though you are their agent, then you need to pump the brakes a little bit and make sure they understand how agency works. The second bullet point for me would be what we see right here, money means motivation. When they start sharing, I may not get the idea that I'm their agent. Maybe they don't have that idea, but they're saying things that could be used against them, not in a court of law in this case, but in a real estate transaction. My budget is $500,000. I'm pre-qualified to spend up to $600,000, but we're trying to stay under $5. Well, that information is going to be used against you. If I work for the seller, for example, that would be one that stands out to me for sure. Anything that would be used against you, anything that could hurt your negotiating standpoint is first substantial contact.
Yeah. So when they share, another one of our instructors on the team says TMI, and
That's right.
We've heard of that acronym, too much information, but specifically when it starts to get into a situation where, gosh, that information could be used against you, given my role as a seller's agent or a sub-agent of the seller. And so again, until you hire me as your buyer's agent, for example, let's hold off on sharing any of that personal or confidential information. Let's keep it to the facts, man. What is that old show, Rob? It's
Dragnet.
Dragnet.
It's
right?
the facts, ma'am.
Just the facts, ma'am. And the facts could be about the house, of course, let's, with that said, and we're showing our age, aren't we, by talking about Dragnet. I mean, gosh, when was that on?
That predates us. That was thanks to cable TV, right?
Okay, good. Yeah. It's not accurate as far as our age.
Right. We're only in our 20s still, but we watch YouTube occasionally.
That's right. Yeah, we'll turn that YouTube on once in a while. But let's compare some of those, what would be first substantial contact to what is not really considered first substantial contact. And again, that's, when you as a real estate agent are sharing just the facts about the house, or the buyer or seller is sharing, specifically the facts of what they're looking for, what they're looking to buy. So, whether or not they're already approved by a lender, that's not first substantial contact. They're just letting us know, hey, I've already, done my due diligence and I've talked to a lender. Not telling you how much I got approved for, but again, that not first substantial contact. So at that kind of example, we would not, as the licensed agent, need to say, hey, stop, don't tell me anymore. Don't tell me anymore, because again, that is not first substantial contact when they're talking about specific money, specific means, or specific motivation. And again, you could see here some additional examples of what is not first substantial contact. So again, undoubtedly, you will be asked on tests, both in the course as well as at the state licensing level, most likely, to identify an example of first substantial contact, and thereby needing to, at that time, if not before, disclose working with real estate agents, the disclosure that, again, expresses the agency role in North Carolina so that the consumer has that understanding. So again, that first substantial contact is where it is focused on as far as when we need to do it. Now, something else to keep in mind too here as we add to the screen, the disclosure of WWREA, Rob, it's required in what kind of transactions?
Sales transactions.
Yeah.
Buying or selling real estate.
Yeah. And this is one of those, Rob, I like to point out, because we're oftentimes, warning our students to look for red flag words or definitive words like all or always or never, right? And this is one of those times where actually all is okay. If you see this in an answer choice, required in all residential and commercial sales transactions, because indeed this disclosure is required in all of those. Now, where it's not required would be in your leases and property management types transactions, but something to keep in mind there as far as when to disclose and in what situations to disclose that. Fantastic. Let's move on to, before we move on to number 3, we've got a bonus thing, as I like to call it. One of those sidebars, or, our series is called 5 Things. And there certainly is not an option for me to change it to 6 things all of a sudden. That would be silly. So how about I consider this one a bonus thing? So Rob, I'm posing the question here as our bonus thing in this episode. When is disclosure of agency status required at initial contact? And I ask this question and emphasize this question because this initial contact gets mixed up sometimes among our students with first substantial contact. So Rob, how would you differentiate this? What's the answer to the question and how do you differentiate?
Sure. So initial, unlike first substantial, I like to tell my students initial is hello, how are you? Like literally greeting.
Right.
And so I tell this story. Let's say I'm showing a house this afternoon. I might just do it, Jason. I might go show a house after this.
All right.
And I'm sitting there in my Honda Element with my little magnet on the side because I'm too cheap to wrap my Element. And I've got my little Rob Grantmeyer realtor magnet on the side that I can peel off when I'm trying to pretend I'm something else, when I'm trying to be a superhero or something. And I'm sitting outside because I'm always early, because I'm neurotic and I'm waiting for my buyer client. And here comes the seller. The seller's walking out. She's pushing her 2.5 kids and 2.5 dogs into the minivan, shoving them all in, and she looks over and she sees, ooh, realtor, look at that. I bet this guy can answer some questions for me. And so she comes walking right over, and who could blame her, right? She's busy with her career, whatever that is. And she doesn't stop to think about agency laws every day like I do. She knocks on the window, and I have electronic windows now, Jason. I've upgraded from the roll down. So I've got electronic, and I roll down my passenger side window. That's initial contact, because I'm a buyer's agent and I'm talking to a seller or a seller's agent. And I need to be careful, because remember, this gal is a civilian in the real estate world. And she may say something to me like, oh, we can't wait to sell this house. This neighbor's killing us. He's so nosy. He watches us through the window with binoculars. We hate the school. We got to sell because my husband just lost his job. And you name it. There's no limit to the amount of stuff that could come flowing out of this otherwise innocent bystander. So here's what I would say. I'd say, hey, nice to meet you. Just so you know, I am meeting my buyer client here in about 5 minutes. And so please don't share anything with me that you would not want the buyer to know. Okay. So otherwise, I'll be happy to answer any questions, have a great chat, talk. But if it's better that you don't share anything with me that you would not tell the potential buyer directly. That's my version of initial contact.
Yeah. Excellent version. I totally am envisioning that.
Can you envision that scenario?
And I'm going to go back and add some sound effects to you and your Honda Element.
Some good music, hopefully, because I'm listening to good music. Probably some Grateful Dead sitting in the Element there.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I always like to think too, like you can't be an undercover agent, right? When you're working with buyers and you encounter sellers or their agent, the seller's agent, you can't be all shady and incognito and not disclose who you are. I can't call you up as a seller's agent and start talking to you without saying, hey, by the way, my name is Jason. I'm with XYZ Realty, and I have a buyer client potentially interested in your property, right? I have to disclose that initial contact as opposed to filling you out and trying to get out of you something that perhaps should not be getting out of you, that kind of thing, especially if you're a seller who, again, may not know any better, the civilian, as you described. So that is a big difference here when we're talking about, and you will see questions in both light, that is when to disclose at first substantial contact, when to disclose at initial contact. And at initial contact, what we're talking about is, again, typical buyer's agent encounters a seller or a seller's agent and begins talking to them. They have to say, hey, this is who I am before we get into, further conversations, want to make sure that I disclose that to you. There's not a form for that though, is it, Rob? I mean, we're just required to initially disclose that information, correct?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. So that was our bonus thing. Let's move on now to number 3 in our top 5 things to know about WWREA. And that's a supplement to the disclosure. Now, we haven't shown you the disclosure in the video. Of course, you will take a look closer at this disclosure in our classes. Of course, also it's available on the North Carolina Real Estate Commission's website. And it's just a one-page document, really. It's a double-sided document, really, but one side is for buyers and one side is for sellers. And then in addition to that one-page document, they have this accompanying Q&A brochure that's pretty handy-dandy that agents are highly encouraged to utilize when explaining the disclosure, when using the disclosure. If your clients, even if they do or don't have questions questions. It's again something that is recommended to use, provide the clients and give them an opportunity to learn a little bit more about working with real estate agents in North Carolina. And again, the role that agency plays and the duties that the agents require. So a great resource. It's not required necessarily to provide. You don't have to get this signed, unlike the disclosure form. But again, just know that it's an accompanying brochure that's used. Also, I would say to our audience, and particularly our students, this is a great learning resource for you while you're in the class. So make sure you navigate your way to the student materials that your instructor has provided. Inside those materials will be a copy of this, and reading that as a student is going to assist you in learning about, again, agency and dual agency types, and really get a better grasp of what you've learned on this topic of disclosure of agency and agency relationships in general. Anything further to add on the Q&A brochure, Rob?
Not really. I just to echo that, I think it's a great study guide, and the commission puts out several other Q&A brochures. Some of them are a little dated, but the information's still relevant. They've got a good one on townhomes and condos. They've got some great information on timeshares. They've got some on subdivision regulations. And so I would definitely take advantage of that, as well as their video library if you're preparing for this exam, potential, especially the pre-licensing exam. You know, when they lay out these free resources, say who better? I mean, Dearborn's a great resource. Real estate schools are a great resource. But when the Real Estate Commission says this is important, we all should pay attention for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I'll make a note to put a copy or a link to the publications area on the NCREC website that you're describing. The publications area, again, filled with great resources that are intended for consumers. But again, we drive our students there to really learn from and read and review materials, including the Q&A on working with real estate agents. I'll be putting that link to that website in our comments on our YouTube page. All right. So number 4 in our top 5 is the opportunity to disclose not only the role of agency and the relationship that me as the licensed agent and you, the consumer in real estate, will enter into, but also the opportunity to get consent and at minimum disclosure of dual agency, the times where we may enter into a dual agency situation or a designated dual agency. Now, dual agency and designated agency of, again, forms of agency that may not be offered by all real estate firms. So as to whether or not this is offered by your firm, that is again specific to the policies and procedures written by the real estate company that you work for. But assuming that your company does practice a dual agency and or designated dual agency, again, this is a great first time opportunity to go ahead and begin the conversation about what this is, because it can seem a little complex to a civilian, as Rob described earlier, someone that perhaps has not sold real estate in quite a while, if at all, in North Carolina. And you don't want to wait until crucial moments like you'd like to schedule an appointment to see a property that's listed by my firm to first now start talking about dual agency, because that's going to kind of make things a little bit more complicated, take the fun out of it. So take this opportunity now, if your firm practices dual agency, designated dual agency, to disclose exactly what that is. Again, going back to number 3, the Q&A kind of helps walk your clients through what dual agency and designated agency is. We've got some examples here on the screen as well. But a crucial time, right? Because you're going to not only talk about it here, you're also going to reiterate this topic and again, get consent or not in the agency agreement, right, Rob? So anytime we go into an official listing agreement with a seller or a buyer's agency agreement with a buyer, we have to talk about dual agency again, and making sure that our clients have a full understanding of what that means. What would you say here, Rob, on number 4, the disclosure of proposed dual and designated agency?
Well, I think one of the things that confuses people about the WWREA And the Real Estate Commission also did a great hour-long video, speaking of their video library, about the new and improved WWREA. I was raised on the old version, the 6-page brochure that I have to remind myself it's not a brochure anymore, it's a disclosure.
Right.
And it actually came out not too long before I got licensed. And when I first got my license, there was a lot of people that pushed back, that didn't want to use it. And so the Real Estate Commission was still training and emphasizing how important it was. And so one of the things that confuses people, even confuses agents, so it certainly confuses the consumer, is that on the working real estate agent's disclosure form that we are making selections. Oh, so you want me to agree right here to be a dual agent? No, that's not what we're saying. All the disclosure form is saying, the working real estate agent disclosure form is simply saying, these are possibilities. These are possible ways that me and my firm could represent you, whether that's single agent. Oh, look at that. Whether that's single agency, in that case, seller's agency, whether that's dual agency, and whether that's designated. So if I work for a firm like Better Homes and Gardens, Paracle Realty, best firm in the Carolinas, then I would be initialing all three. I'd be initialing all three of those, because sure, it's possible I might be your listing agent and someone else may procure a buyer. It's possible that my firm could work as dual agents, and most likely I would work as a designated dual agent in that scenario. So I would emphasize, we're not selecting here. These are just possible ways that we could represent you. Now, if our firm doesn't, for example, if I'm a sole proprietor and I don't work for any firm, then there's no way I'm going to check designated, because that would be impossible. You cannot have designated dual agency with only one agent. So all we're going to do on here is say, these are just possibilities. These are potential ways this thing could go, and not just initial it, but also explain the basics of what dual agency is, explain the basics of designated dual agency. So we're not making any commitment whatsoever here. We're simply laying out that these are possibilities and helping to educate the consumer. So that way, when this does come up eventually, an hour from now or 3 days from now, they understand what we're talking about, and it's not a brand new concept to them at that time.
Yeah. It's the drink menu at the bar.
There you go. We can relate, right?
It doesn't mean you have to order these.
Yeah, that's right.
This is what we serve, right? This is
That's
what
right.
we at this particular firm serve. And it one of the things too I want to make a point of, Rob, is the very first line here on the form that I'm highlighting. And this isn't so much test worthy, but it's good in practice to make sure you express to your potential clients that you're disclosing agency to, that this is not a contract. We are not entering into agency either at this point. This does not bind you in any way. This is simply, again, me providing you with the menu, as I like to call it, and making sure you're understanding the options that we provide. And we, again, are going to bring up some of these options that we offer again, possibly later on, when we resort to a written agency agreement, or when you, again, want to tour a home that's listed by my firm. That, again, puts us into a dual agency opportunity. And I want to make sure you're clearly understanding what that means as a client, and whether or not we offer designated dual agency as well. So definitely, I love me too, Rob. I grew up on the 6-page brochure. This is one of the best things, bias speaking here, that I think that North Carolina Real Estate Commission has done, is kind of simplify this disclosure requirement and the actual form that accompanies the disclosure requirement to just one page. As you can see here, this is a 2-page document, but one is for buyers, one is for sellers. Again, taking that from a 6-page, 3-panel brochure was great, to say the least.
People don't want the encyclopedia version anymore. They want the bullet point. They want the PowerPoint presentation, not the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Right. Well, and especially in situations where this comes up quite often, first substantial contact perhaps comes up quite often in open house situations, right? Where you are hosting an open house. You, as the host of the open house, are obviously working for the seller, either as the seller's agent or a sub-agent of the seller. And therefore, anyone that comes in not represented by you or your firm, may may start spewing some stuff other than, hey, I'm looking for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and I am approved and I have cash money to pay for it and I need it to be closed in 2 weeks. What can you do? Don't talk about those types of things again.
And also you're welcome to talk about them. Let me just warn you first, because we may end up being best pals, me and you, Mr. Buyer, but we may not. And so I need to warn you that you're probably better off not sharing that until you've at least understood how agency works in North Carolina. I also want to emphasize there are situations when I first started, I think I did an open house every weekend for 3 years and saw hundreds, if not thousands of people come through these open houses. And there were many, many cases where we did not reach first substantial contact. Just because somebody visits an open house doesn't mean we've achieved first substantial contact, because in my case, they may not say very much at all. Some people, one person wants to come in and talk to you for a half hour. The next people want to come in and they've got they had a discussion in the car. Sweetie, don't say anything to this guy. He's a salesman. So don't even look him in the eye. And if they aren't saying anything and I'm the one doing the talking, I'm doing the one, telling them about the house, telling them about the community, that's not first substantial contact. It's when that person, the potential buyer or potential seller, I think these are especially important when you're doing a listing appointment, potential buyer, potential seller client, when they start sharing their confidential information that could be used against them, that's going to be our first substantial contact.
Right. And again, this reduction down to 1 page now, it makes it so much easier to do that. Because again, the requirement is not only that we disclose what we're talking about, but we also present this form to our folks that we're disclosing it to. And again, taking it from a brochure down to a 1-page form that, again, is basically just a menu being handed to you. Like when you're in a restaurant, here's your menu, here's what we offer in terms of agency options. Definitely made it a lot easier and more effective, in my opinion. And let me reiterate one more time, because I'm thinking about it, Rob, the more I'm thinking about it, the more I probably should have included this as one of our top 5. But I said it just moments ago. Remember that this disclosure does not bind you, does not create agency.
Yes.
It is not a contract. And so if you're tested on a question, if you see questions in testing that talk about, well, we signed WWREA, we're in an agency agreement. No, you're really looking for, we disclosed WWREA, and then also we're in a buyer's agency agreement or a listing agreement, some kind of official agency agreement. So just want to reiterate that one more time. All right, let's round it out with our number 5. And this goes to another number that is important to remember in your studies, the very famous number 3. And the reason I say famous, I was observing a class earlier this morning, Rob, and the number 3 came up, and the instructor was saying, how many times is the number 3 applicable in a lot of rules and laws and things like that? And she counted off all the ones, and it made me realize, number 3 is pretty important in this industry. So this is another time where the retention of the disclosure, the form that you've actually filled out and presented and reviewed with your client or potential client, must be retained for, you guessed it, 3 days? No, 3 years. 3 years. This falls under Rule 21 NCAC 58.0108. One of the things that talks about, or the rule that actually talks about all of the things, all of the forms, the transaction details that you must keep record of, even if, and here's the caveat to the WWREA, even if agency is not formed, you must keep this record on file for 3 years and make them available upon request by the Real Estate Commission. So 3 is the magic number once again, right, Rob?
Correct. And what I tell people I used to do back when we had the big one was I would have one folder for what I called almost the orphan WWREAs. Like, these guys didn't go anywhere, but they're still important, because what is going to happen is we used to keep the panel, we used to be ours to keep, and then we'd give the rest of the brochure
panel
to the consumer, right? And what was important and still is important is that our information, because the consumer doesn't even have to sign it, but my information, my name and my license number, they're taking that with them, right? So if they feel that I've done something inappropriate or I violated their rights somehow, they've got a way that they can track me down. They can file a complaint with the real estate commission. So even though we may not ever become a buyer, they may not become my buyer client, they may not become my seller client, I would have one. This was back before, Google Drive and Dropbox. And so I'd have one physical folder for the ones that just didn't go anywhere, but I still kept them for 3 years. And then, however, if we decide that, well, I am going to work with this person as their buyer agent, or I am going to work with this person as their listing agent, now they get their own folder, and I'll transfer the WWREA. And that's one of the things the real estate commission will tell you every time is the first question they ask is, bring us if you find yourself being investigated for something, the first question is, bring us your last 5 transaction files, and they're looking for your WWREA. And one thing that WWREAs, I should say plural, and one thing they're on the hunt for is if the date is always the same as your agency agreement, which is the same as your contract date, they get suspicious because they know that some agents aren't very forthcoming with this information. And frankly, I've seen agents do this where they try to roll out the WWREA and roll out the buyer agency agreement after they've been working with someone for weeks or even months. And that's not the idea. The idea is to do this at the beginning, at first substantial contact. So that's the kind of things they're looking for. So definitely keep it for 3 years. And you're right. If in doubt, that would be Jason's guess C, right? That's your C right there.
That's my C answer, right?
If in doubt, guess 3 years. There's very few times that 2 is the number. 2 out of 5 years for broker in charge, 2 out of 5 years for the capital gains exemption. And that's about it for 2s. Everything else is 3 years or 3 days. So
yeah. And you mentioned something that I think is worthy of repeating as well. You have to give your client or potential client a copy of this, right? This is
correct.
something, again, that's involved with copies requirement. And that, again, is a 3-day requirement, is it not? I have a maximum of 3 days to get them a copy. So that they have that with them. And like you said, it's not always, you're not always going to have a situation where they've signed it. But at least at a minimum, you've disclosed it, you've given them a copy, you're going to retain a copy for your records, again, for 3 years minimum. So definitely remember the 3-year rule, and then the 3 days to get them a copy, 3 days maximum to get them a copy, not only of the WWRA, but of any record within the transaction that they have signed. All right, my friend. Well, I think that rounds us out with our top 5 things that you need to know about working with real estate agents disclosure. Hopefully this was helpful. Thanks for your help, sir, on explaining these to our audience. Again, be looking for additional episodes, as we like to call them, of our 5 Things series being added regularly to our YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe and hopefully like this video, share this video. Again, remember, we'll put a link in the comments to the North Carolina Real Estate Commission's publications area, where not only you will find a copy of this WWREA disclosure form that we are required to disclose at first substantial contact, but also some additional publications that will go along with your studies as well. Rob, thanks again for being here, buddy. We'll see you hopefully next time.
Thank you.
Enjoy the weekend.
Thanks too.